Hi class, so this week we're covering chapter 12, using the advocacy spectrum. So as agents of change, we need to explore where we want to go, how we're going to get there, the ends to the means. Advocacy is the heart of social work. Social workers are advocates. So as a social work student, you will be advocating for clients, whether you're already doing it now or sometime working in the field. Advocacy is something that all social workers do. It is part of our ethical code, values, and history, and it's basically inherent in almost all practice. Advocacy, simply defined, is representing, and supporting a client, a group, organization, or cause to others. Advocacy, whether for an individual or for a cause, a case, or a class, means championing, speaking, and acting for the interests of our clients or citizens. Advocacy has a role of transforming private troubles into public issues or personal problems into social issues. It has a responsibility in challenging inhumane conditions at a micro or macro level. So in direct service work, advocacy is often a part of client support and representation, and if possible, involves client self-advocacy. So when it comes to case advocacy, it emphasizes ensuring service delivery in one's field of practice, in securing resources and services for particular clients in one's caseload. So cause and class advocacy involves groups, institutions, and modification of social conditions. So when you think about advocacy and social work, so what separates social work advocacy practice from any other advocacy profession is that social work meaningfully engages and partners with clients and other marginalized groups for social change. It is a partnership with and not just on behalf of that distinguishes social work advocacy. So when it comes to advocacy, it is a partnership for social workers. It is not just you acting on the behalf of the client. It's basically you, partnering with the client. When it comes to values, case and client advocacy, like we talked about just now, are inherent in NASW's ethical standards. So that standard that states regarding primacy of client interest in calling for client self-determination. Social and political action requires social causes to be transformed into social and political advocacy to achieve an equitable distribution of social resources for social justice. So social justice is very big in the social work field. So social workers advocate in social and political arenas to achieve an equitable distribution of the community's physical, economic, and other social resources for social justice under the profession's ethical code, which we all know is NASW. Social workers has chosen a side, and our values compel us to work to the end, or at least alleviate acute, chronic, and seemingly unfixable miseries. So as social workers, we already picked the side that we wanted to advocate for the less fortunate. So when it comes to process, although often associated more with social action, advocacy is generally inherent in most community practice that pursues social justice, from community development to social marketing. Advocacy is a change process, promoting a client's case or a community's interest or a cause or ideal that involves directed, purposive, and intentional change. So advocacy change strategies can vary widely from direct social action and political action through education. Advocacy and social actions are strategies or means to an end. Such strategies are employed by progressive professionals and by a wide variety of concerned citizens. Also, organizations that vigorously oppose the status quo. So, advocacy can be micro, such as self and individual, client, and case, and it can be group advocacy, as well as macro, which is concerned with more of the institutional and social cause advocacy. Cause or class advocacy is a form of social action, and it may be a part of a social movement. For example, the Birmingham bus boycott was a class advocacy, social action, and a part of the civil rights movement. So, what is advocacy? Advocacy means that you're championing or is speaking um, for the interests of clients or citizens, right? So, you're advocating for the less fortunate. You're speaking up for those who cannot speak up for themselves. And then, case advocacy emphasizes ensuring service delivery in one's field of practice and then securing those resources and services for the clients that you're currently seeing or the clients on your caseload. So, what is social action? Social action is a subset of community organization as practices and strategies to change community relations and behavior patterns to promote development, allocation, redistribution, and control of community statuses and resources, including social power. Social action is a collective endeavor to promote a cause or to make a social change in the face of opposition. It usually are people who feel aggrieved to take direct action. The critical component is the feeling of being aggrieved, whether or not there is factual basis for that feeling. So when you compare advocacy with or compared with advocacy, the goal of social action is broader than just advocating for someone. It is a distinguishing feature of social action, or a distinguishing feature for social action is the emphasis it has on internal change through consciousness raising and changing. Recapping social change. So, social action works to promote change, ranging from reformist, incremental change to radical fundamental change. It is used by progressives. Generally, the purpose of social action is to redistribute community resources, especially community power and social relationships. Tactics embrace social marketing campaigns to educate and raise consciousness about social conditions, coalition building and networking, direct action of coalitions, and political action. So usually you can use more than one of these tactics in order to conduct social change. Advocacy and social action, from a progressive standpoint, pursue fairness in individual and collective rights. They seek social justice. So sometimes this may require creating new legal rights to ensure a level playing field for everyone. Individuals and groups fighting for their own rights contribute to the rights of all members of that community. Ensuring civil rights and promoting social equality for African Americans, for example. The civil rights movement provided the impetus for civil rights and equal opportunity for women and for the LGBT community. The mode of change influences our practice in so many ways. Social workers sometimes help secure or create new rights, such as the right for treatment or to die, and often help implement or enforce existing rights. So there's different ways in terms of how social workers can ensure that the individual rights are met. So the rights we're talking about fall into three categories: due process or procedural rights, substantive rights, and basic human rights. So the first two flow from the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution of the United States, and the other provisions of the Constitution, legislative directives, and or the court orders. Due process rights require agencies and authorities to play by the rules, to give the process due. Substantive rights are those that apply to everyone, free speech, to those in a certain category, for example, the right to Medicare benefit, if criteria is met. Basic human rights are promoted by the United Nations and also include freedom from arbitrary government restrictions and our right to food. Immigrants lacking citizenship rights have humanitarian appeals rights and our right to human treatment, although these rights are not always honored by the nations. Advocacy can be carried out directly with a client or indirectly on behalf of a client or a group or for the public good. Self-advocacy is elemental to any form of advocacy. It involves self-awareness, critical practice, and assertiveness. Without raising one's own consciousness, it is difficult to raise the consciousness of others. A practitioner who wants to start a client group must believe in that project and his or her ability to carry it out. They must convince the agency of both, and then they must bond with the group members. Self-advocacy in social work includes self-help and helping others to help themselves. So the workers can provide the knowledge and encouragement that the clients may need to act personally and collectively on their own behalf. So the job of the social worker is to actually teach the client or help them gain the knowledge and skills to be able to advocate on their own behalf. Self-advocacy also occurs in low-income groups and groups concerned with specific issues such as drunk driving or AIDS. Client advocacy means helping clients in self-determination, helping them to obtain their rights within the agency and the community, supporting their empowerment, and raising consciousness. Group advocacy can arise from case advocacy. It can be a part of a particular reform effort, or it can be a component of an ongoing community organization and development process or a social movement. For example, parents of children who are both physically and mentally challenged and thus cannot use existing group homes might come together to get facilities modified or changed or built to meet their children's needs. The practitioner advocate's task is to help the parents develop consciousness and a collective consciousness and the knowledge and skills to self-advocate. In assessing the problem, we may start with individuals and end up advocating for an entire group. A social worker troubled that a classmate are teasing a boy in speech therapy about his stuttering might talk to his teacher. This same concern may lead to an advocate writing a letter to a TV show that makes fun of a character who stutters. A worker with a mentally ill client in jail, as a result, not of a crime, but of his symptoms, should tend to that person's needs, but can also note other ill inmates. So the worker can then find out what is happening and how to aid such prisoners. Sometimes we work on behalf of people who are scattered and are never seen by each other or the worker, as with the macro advocacy. Okay, so a practitioner advocate wants to ensure that maximum benefits are delivered to the greatest number of people, but not at the expense of the original client's position. So a client should never be sacrificed for the greater good, except at the client's urging after fully informed consent. Community advocacy has many facets and bridges the micro and macro advocacy modalities of the spectrum. Community status requires community consciousness raising and education about tactics challenging the status quo. Community advocacy most often arises from situations that dishearten, disadvantage, aggravate, or harm a segment or segments of a community. Community residents can advocate on their own, and they can use residential advocates such as social workers. Social workers have an ethical obligation to raise a professional voice on behalf of the unorganized, subgroups, and pressing community needs. Policy and political advocacy offers an opportunity for system change. Political advocacy is practiced across the ideological gamut. Political advocates seek change at any level of government through electoral and political processes. Social workers work in many governmental jobs that involve full-time advocacy, including county commissions, state staff positions, or even legislative directors in the U.S. Senate. Some participate in media and political campaigns that involve field organizing. Most social work and progressive policy and political advocates, however, are usually grassroots citizens, advocates, and they're not elected officials. Some are hired guns or paid political advocates and lobbyists. Increasingly, the advocates run field operations for campaigns, lobby, and create and maintain information and voter databases. Lobbying is usually to influence policy decision makers. Lobbying can be indirect or direct. Indirect lobbying involves the staging and social marketing of social ideas by generating public and media support for a position to encourage policymakers to adopt it to maintain their constituency's support. Direct lobbying is when lobbyists directly engage and communicate with policymakers. So, the advocacy role and the ombudsperson role are frequently confused. An advocate pushes the interests of a person, a group, community, a point of view, and a cause, or a social and political philosophy. An ombudsperson serves more as a go-between, an interpreter, and a problem solver, untangling various points of view and sees if rules, procedures, and contracts are honored. An, an ombudsperson is not a conventional mediator or alternative dispute resolutional player, but rather an effective criticizer who tries to set right the government system that is out of gear. The ombudsperson's powers are to investigate, criticize, recommend, and publicize. Advocate most frequently work outside government or the large organization, while the ombudspersons normally work as grievance handlers and red tape cutters within agencies or targets. Advocacy can also arise inside or outside of an agency. An internal advocate makes changes for the client through vigilance and intervention inside the agency, using decision-making channels where possible and informal influence systems. The question as to whether a practitioner advocate follows the stated wishes of the client or pursues the client's best interest is more apparent than real. Self-determination and client empowerment argue that a client, not the practitioner, advocate should decide the client's best interest. So the client should decide their best interest, not the practitioner advocate. The practitioner advocate's responsibility is to provide the client with his or her best judgments of the consequences of pursuing the client's wishes. Clients have the right to self-determination. However, the practitioner advocate does not have an obligation to assist the client in any foolish, unethical, illegal, or self-destructive behavior. The practitioner advocate can also withdraw from the relationship at any time. How long to cooperate, coerce, or compromise before becoming adversarial is a critical consideration. Some warn against escalating too soon on behalf of powerless clients who, unlike the worker, will suffer the consequences if the action fails. They insist that the roles of a broker and mediator must be tried first. On the other hand, others urge workers who want to change their agencies to consider both collaborative and adversarial strategies depending on the circumstances. One consideration should be whether or not the target of change is rational, open to new ideas, and acting in good faith. We must carefully consider with clients and colleagues whether a combative or a facilitative stance will be most productive in a given situation. Persuasion is a key interpersonal skill used in both micro and macro interchanges. It involves promoting marketing, working for favorable interpretations for a client or a cause, and changing minds. Persuasion can take many forms. An advocate may win a public argument by using a dramatic story that can unify and energize community and reinforce values and inspire collective action. There are certain rules of thumb for persuading others. And first, you need to know what you want. So, knowing what you want, knowing the facts and have them available, understanding your source of power, rehearsing and then rehearse some more. Use clear, simple language and visuals. Appeal to both emotional and logics. So appeal to both emotions and logic, and making eye contact if culturally appropriate. Representation often involves a forum such as a meeting or a session of assembly where the advocate and the person seeking help together make a case. Representation begins when one person asks another person and then a second person agrees to become a spokesperson. So to represent someone is to take that person's view, to advocate while being forthright about the person's chances and prospects, and when nothing can be done. Community practitioners negotiate and bargain informally and formally to build networks on behalf of neighborhoods, programs, and projects and during issue campaigns. So negotiations occur when the two sides sit down together and try to come up with a resolution that is acceptable, if not completely satisfactory to all parties concerned. It is important to know your position and to learn quickly whether the negotiator has decision-making authority. Bargaining is a process whereby two or more parties attempt to settle what each shall give and take or perform and receive in transaction between them. Bargaining is a process whereby two or more parties attempt to settle what each shall give and take or perform and receive in transactions between them. To know how to bargain during the actual negotiation, negotiators engage intensively with those they represent. Problem solvers work toward reaching a collaborative solution that concludes in a workable agreement. Ideally, each party leaves the negotiation feeling that it has attained something it wanted. Interest-based negotiation stresses the following elements of a successful principled negotiation. First, their interest. Each party needs their desires and their concerns and fears. Options are the potential solutions parties can take together. Alternatives are each party's independent choices. Criteria is established standards for legitimacy and fairness. Communication is organized thinking, addressing misunderstandings, questioning, and listening. Relationships, establishing trust, working relationships. And commitment, which is clear, feasible agreements. So an advocate must know how to contend, how to insist, how to negotiate, how to bargain, and how to leave. This means defending and protecting an individual, getting those who have authority and hold power to change their minds or behavior, and holding one's ground with intimidating people. This is knowing what to do and doing it in the face of opposition. Rational legal authority is the legitimate power to influence or command thought, opinion, or behavior. A rational legitimate authority figure is a person in command who has legitimate power to make decisions. Any practitioner advocate wanting to help others to make changes in a community must deal with authority figures. So, rules of thumb for dealing with authority include the following: know the system being confronted, know your facts, be ready to demonstrate that you have done your part, know what you want, consider all options about the time, the place, and the matter of engagement, have material organized in a serviceable fashion for use and under pressure, speak in an even tone, listen carefully and take notes, look for a clear decision. And this brings us to the end of chapter 12.